Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel on connecting the dots between psychological safety and team management. I'm Rod Hutchings, and I'm joining from Bangkok, Thailand. I'm actually from Melbourne, Australia, but I'm actually here on a national volleyball tour where psych safety is actually really critical. So when I think of psychological safety, I think it's a shared belief the team is safe for risk-taking, vulnerability, speaking up without fear of punishment. So we'll dive into that much deeper as we get into the panel. We've got some amazing panelists who are going to share this topic with us, and let's bring them forward, please. Hello, good afternoon, morning.
Hello.
So it's 9 p.m. here in Bangkok. So to start us off, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and what your interest is about the topic, and maybe a little bit of background that you've had with psychological safety and team management. Nice and brief. So we'll just go around clockwise. So up the top first, Noelle, I think it's.
All right. Hello. Good morning or good evening to you, Rod. My name is Noelle Peart. I'm the Vice President of Learning and Inclusion at Exos. And we are a health and human performance company that gets folks ready for the moments that matter. When I think about psychological safety, you know, I love, Brad, your introduction. You talked about it's about the fear. It's about not having the fear, right, to make mistakes and to fail. And I think that's really important in allowing people to fail forward, right, and also fail fast. And I think that's some of the cornerstones of psychological safety. But I also approach it from a DEI lens in terms of connecting it to belonging. And when you have those environments, you're able to then have a place where people feel included and belonging and want to show up as their true self. So I can't wait to get into this conversation with this group, but that's just some of the things that are top of mind for me and just with my background. So, hi.
Thank you and welcome. So we'll go around clockwise down. So
Anuja.
Yep. Anuja.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
I'm super super glad to be here today. I work for Metro in the DC area, and I manage leadership development, executive coaching, and team assessments. My interest in psychological safety, I'm an industrial organizational psychology majors, and I have learned about this about 20 years ago, to date myself. But I think especially around the COVID time, right, when everybody was talking about team performance, remote working, and then there were questions around, Anuja, we need training on innovation because people are not sharing ideas. They're not coming up with, things how we can make our products and services better. And that's when we slowly linked it back to psychological safety. Do your people feel safe sharing ideas and feedback that may or may not be in alignment with organizational goals and priorities? So that's really the starting of the conversation. And I'm reading The Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmondson. She's the Harvard professor who gave this term psychological safety back in the 1990s. So that's what I'm hoping to share with everyone and learn from everyone here today. Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you. And last but not least, Beth.
Hi, my name is Beth Message. I have a coaching and consulting business, and I really help companies develop an internal pipeline of highly capable leaders at every level. And so I think I first learned about psychological safety in my corporate career, probably 15 plus years ago to date myself as well. And, I know the statistics on it, and I've read the Project Aristotle and all of that, and that's all great. But it's when I really saw it play out on teams. I watched really smart, capable leaders decimate their teams because people just didn't feel safe to be there. I've seen people who were great at their jobs who weren't able to really grow because they didn't feel like they had the opportunity to try something and fail. And so I feel really strongly about this because I've seen it just play out time and time again. And it's something that I focus on in my work with teams even now, because if we can't really start to work on a lot of the other stuff if we don't start here first.
No, absolutely. And as I mentioned, I'm in Thailand and I'm here on a national volleyball tour for the Australian team. And, it's really critical playing high performance sports that we really create that environment, because there's certainly lots of mistakes that happen and you want to just keep learning and getting better. So I think we'll dive into that as we go on. So maybe just to unpack a little bit more about the definitions and just setting up foundations right, could you just help define psych safety for us and just explain a bit more about why it's really crucial in a team setting for teams? And anyone can go first. So I'll let you pick. Who wants to go first?
So I can jump in. I think the definition that you gave at the beginning is a great one, right? There are a number out there, but it's really a shared expectation by members on the team that it's safe to take risks, it's safe to fail, it's safe to try things, and you're not going to get punished or berated for it. It's also a place where it's safe to ask for feedback, where there's an element of growth mindset. I think there's probably a more elegant way to define it, but I think it's really a feeling. I had posted even on LinkedIn this morning about this post, and someone responded like, the best teams I've been on are the ones where I felt psychologically safe. So even if people don't know the words, they know the feeling.
Yeah, no, really, really good answer there. Anyone want to add into that?
Sure. I would like to look at this from the lens of danger. What does psychological danger look like, right? And that is when, if I say, hey, I'm not feeling completely up to my work today, right? I'm feeling a little tired. Maybe I didn't sleep well. Maybe I've got somebody who's not feeling well at home. And that is somewhere impacting my presence, my 100% presence at work. Do I feel safe sharing that with my team? Or do I worry that, hey, if I say this, people are going to judge me in my team. They're going to think I'm slacking. Maybe I'm not serious about my job. And then with the layoffs that are happening right now, I don't want to be anywhere in the line of sight where I could be perceived as not committed to my job. If these feelings exist in the team, right, it may not be the whole team, but even it lies with some of the people in the team, then that is a sign of psychological safety not being present. And that's where leaders need to pause and say, hey, does everybody in my team feel safe to share whatever they're feeling? If they don't agree with a certain project or decision, do they feel safe in sharing that? We may or may not be able to work on it, right? It's again, there's a lot of elements that go into it, but are they at least seen, heard, and valued?
Thanks. And Noelle, have you got anything you would like to add?
Yeah, and plus one to both of their comments. I think the other piece is when it comes to psychological safety, I think there's always a belief that it's only the leader's responsibility. And one thing I want to talk about is that it's everyone's responsibility on that team, right? Of course, the leader sets the tone and creates the environment where people can then have those conversations. But it also comes with you, right? Like, what kind of internal baggage are you bringing where you can then feel comfortable, where you want to be able to talk to your teammates, right? Because if I feel that Beth's closed off, I may not want to, share and feel comfortable having those conversations and making mistakes because I feel like Beth may judge me, and we could be peers, right? It doesn't always have to be the leader. So I think that's really important for people to realize that everyone has a responsibility, and Beth talks about a shared responsibility. But of course, that's going to vary depending on your role in the team. I just think that's a really important concept, that it's not just the onus on the leader. Everyone is involved.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and I did sort of mention, like, part of the question was, why is it crucial in a team setting? And my background is in the Air Force, and we're flying, and I've participated in investigating accidents where we've found the accidents that people had experienced similar flying scenarios numerous times earlier, but didn't share what happened to them in fear of retribution. And that's actually pretty pronounced in the airline industry as well, is that and it's really critical there, that's just one example of an industry that's critical, that the team is contributing so that it's actually also making, the broader team, the bigger picture, safe, is a really critical element to it. So now you also mentioned about leaders and you mentioned about shared responsibility. So I'm just wondering, from a leader's perspective, what are some of the things leaders can do to share that responsibility for building and maintaining psychological safety across their teams?
I'll start us off. First, it starts with vulnerability, right? The leader has to open up a space and understand, right? So first, emotional intelligence. I have to be self-aware of who I am to be able to then share some of those stories with my team. I think, especially when I talk about psychological safety and connection to belonging, people think they can walk into a room and say, okay, everybody, psychologically safe, let's talk about everything, and it doesn't work that way. I have to exemplify that as a leader, to say that when I make a mistake, I share that with my team so that they know, oh, Noelle made a mistake. It's okay, right? Like, she didn't get in trouble. The world didn't end, and all these pieces. And then as a leader, when I do that, it's also maybe about being a little vulnerable about who I am as a person. So I'm sharing some things about myself. I don't have to share my entire life story, but the person needs to feel comfortable that they can connect with me, and they know it's a place where if they're struggling with something or they have questions, that they want to have the conversation and open up the doors. So the leader sets the tone in terms of that way. And then the leader also is ensuring that when other folks on the team are having those wins and opportunities, they're celebrating them. And then if I fail, hey, you know what? We failed, but here's how we maybe made a comeback. Here's how we pivoted, and talk about those things. A lot of times as leaders, we don't want to talk about how we messed up and then how we corrected it. We just talk about how we won at the end. But you have to tell the entire story so then the team understands that there was a story versus here's just a win. And I think that's really important from a leader's responsibility as well. So I'll start the conversation and love to hear.
Yeah, no, you started it really well, because I think what you've said is the leader needs to model vulnerability in a way, and the leader when something happens, not react to that in a way that sort of, has people feeling unsafe, essentially. But who wants to add on to that as well?
Yeah, I think also being really overt about it, like using the words. I think, you absolutely have to model the behavior, but I think some people don't even recognize, particularly if you come from an organization where this is something you've never heard of, or it definitely wasn't in practice, being able to actually talk about what psychological safety is. In some cases that might mean like, hey, we're going to do a team building and we're bringing someone in to actually help us work through this and assess where we're at. I think it's also things like hiring, right? Like some of the characteristics, we obviously want people to have the technical skills that we need for the job, but hiring and asking about things like vulnerability, about empathy, about curiosity, those are 3 characteristics that if people even know nothing about psychological safety, but they come in with those characteristics as being really important to them and can speak to how they think about them, how they, how that plays out for them at work or, in their lives, you can get a really good sense of, is this person someone who is going to come into this team with psychological safety, being able to actually make psychological safety a priority. So, yeah, I think sometimes we try to do this like jujitsu in the background of like, I'm going to do this and people are going to feel it. And it's like, right, but let's actually just talk about it and make it an expectation that we all behave this way.
Yeah. No.
I like that, especially, when it's making those behaviors tangible rather than just throwing terms at people. Hey, this is a psychologically safe environment. Can we say, hey, in the meeting today, we're going to take a pause before reacting to anything that somebody says, right? Just making it tangible and clarifying roles, expectations, what is okay, what is not okay. So if anybody's sharing feedback, one, it should not come across as a personal attack. But at the same time, people should take a pause and look at the message rather than the way it's delivered, right? So what is okay within this group? What is not okay? If there is a serious issue that they want to discuss, again, that personal issue does not belong to this team discussion, but there are other resources where they can reach out, whether it's employee services, whether it's, talking to compliance, HR, legal, right? The appropriate teams. And then creating those structures, the systems in the organization, which enable people to speak up, right? And speaking up, it's typically something that is seen about extroverts, but the way introverts could speak up without really talking is maybe if there is an anonymous pulse check, a survey, which asks people, what are they feeling? What are they concerned about? What would be helpful for them to do their jobs and feel that they belong in the organization? So creating some of these systems and then making sure, going back to what Noel was saying about modeling those behaviors, saying, oops, I'm sorry, I made this mistake, or I'm sorry, I don't know a lot about this change, but I'm going to find out. And hey, I'm feeling anxious about something, saying that out, but at the same time, keeping it productive, keeping it positive in terms of what can we do to navigate this situation with the emotions that we have. So I think as leaders, model those behaviors and then create those structures and systems for employees to feel like they can speak up as well.
One of the things that you said, if you don't mind, that I thought was great, and I think we should highlight, is also not assuming everyone is the same and has the same comfort level, right? I think sometimes leaders feel like, well, no, I gave everyone an opportunity. I asked them in the session to share their feedback. Well, that might not actually work, right? So I think I really appreciate that you called that out of, people have different comfort levels, people have different communication styles. And as a leader, it's not your responsibility to, try to make everything specific to every individual, but giving a breadth of opportunities for people to build that comfortability around being vulnerable or around sharing their feedback or around sharing their mistakes, I think is really important. So that was a great call out.
Yeah, I think I'll double click on that too. In my own family, my son, he doesn't like to speak up in class. He's in high school and he's got an amazing teacher that he'll ask questions and he'll walk past and see what dot points he's got written down to bring that into the conversation. So he'll bring it up, but he really facilitates that because Ryan has some amazing ideas, so that brings it in and brings Ryan into those conversations. So that's my little example of what you're talking about, I think. So I'd just like to unpack it as well a little bit more. I'm just wondering if I was talking about, how do leaders build, maintain across their teams. If you've been part of any courses, workshops, what sort of activities have you seen in those sort of courses where you can sort of model that? So you're outside of your work environment, but you can practice and demonstrate, a way of applying psychological safety in activities. Have you got any in your kit bag, essentially?
I mean, one thing that I saw a leader do that I think was really effective is I spent a lot of time in a lot of my career in retail, and so there's a product creation piece of that, right? And so you've got creatives working with, designers working with merchants with inventory management to try to get the best product in the stores. And a particular leader was trying to get his team to be more innovative, and like trying to tell someone to be innovative is also like trying to tell them to be taller. It's weird, right? Like, how do you do that? And how do we get there? And one of the things that he recognized is people were afraid to share ideas, to try things, like, because, there is a price tag if we try something and it doesn't work. But he started to develop a practice where whenever they were reviewing anything in the team, that they would kind of be like, okay, so we're going to just do a little recap, like, what's going well with this? Where are we having issues, or where did we fail? What, where did we have success? And anytime they talk about what's not going well, it's like, all right, and what did we learn from that? Not how did we fix it? Not how do we make it better? And oh my God, don't let anybody know. Like, what are we learning from that? And he also had a really great practice of, as things iterate over time, he would ask questions around, like, someone would, offer something, be like, great, where did you learn that? Or how did you learn to do that? Or, did you ever learn from a mistake? Like, he was really very overt about it. And I would sit in with team sessions and I would hear the team asking each other that. Like, someone would say, like, oh yeah, we really thought it would do X and it did Y. Oh yeah, no, that really sucks. So what can we learn from that? What should we do next time? And it just started to build the muscle. And it was because it was the consistency, it was the practice. It became the fabric of how the team talked about the work. So it wasn't like, pause, we're going to have a psychological safety moment now so that you can offer your failings to me. It just became a way that they did business. And I think the more that we can, help leaders incorporate and team members incorporate it into just, this is how we do it. I think that's when it becomes really effective and really takes root. So I was always impressed by his approach.
Yeah, I'll sort of double down on that. That's a really good point. But I'll let others speak. But I'll come back to that as well. Really
I've got two icebreakers that I totally love, and I'm going to share those with you. My first question when I begin any training or discussion on psychological safety is, and I want everyone here to answer this, how many of you have been part of the meeting after the meeting? Right? We've all been there. We don't speak up in the actual meeting, but when we walk out, we're like, okay, what was happening in there? What was this person saying, thinking, feeling? Like, don't they know this? And why are they not considering something else? And that becomes a great starter for the next conversation, which is, why did you not feel safe saying this in the group, right? And then all of the feelings that people have around, well, I don't know if this person likes me, or my ideas have not been accepted in the past, or whatever have you, right? So that's the first one. The second one is, and this is something that we can do every day. If you ask anybody, hey, how are you today? What's the typical answer you get?
Excellent.
Right? I'm great. I'm fine. I'm excellent. Doing well. Right? Thank you. We don't even pause to think, how am I really feeling today? How am I doing? Right? And I think going back to modeling vulnerability, being able to say, okay, I'm not doing so great today. I could be better. Right? I've got something else on my mind. So simple things like this, where we're not sharing what we truly think or feel with people. And that's a great starting point for psychological safety conversations. What I also love doing in these sessions are role plays, because in real life, we are so bothered with conflicting priorities, with things we have to get to. We just work on autopilot. So in training or in any kind of, a space where people feel good connecting with each other, giving them that situation to say, okay, now that you have the time and you have the clarity or the mindfulness to think about what would be the right response rather than just reacting in the heat of the moment. So for example, let's say you as a leader have made a mistake and somebody has given you feedback that, I don't feel this is the right decision or the right idea. Do you say, thank you for highlighting that? Otherwise, we'd have taken a totally wrong decision, wasted a lot of resources, and just realized much later that we were wrong. You highlighted this right now, and you saved us a lot of that agony, right? And doing this in a safe environment where people say, okay, here's what I can do the next time this situation comes up so that I don't go back to my autopilot mode and, feeling the fight or flight response. I just react in an inappropriate way.
I love. Go ahead, Ryan.
You keep going. You keep adding.
I was just gonna say I love both of those examples. One of the ones that I use that I've used in the past is if anyone has done any work with design thinking, and Beth talked about that in terms of asking about how people are learning, and design thinking takes it a little step further and allows folks to get into a room and and to your point, right? Like, how do you just innovate, right? Like, be more innovative, but like, it does it in a way that sometimes you don't even realize, right? Like, that you're being innovative and you're coming up with something new. And it's not necessarily, it may not be the entire principle, but even the concept of asking, like, how might we? And saying, hey, right, let's have a conversation about what's possible. And I think sometimes in those meetings, when it's like, all right, here's the problem, right? Maybe it's, in HR meeting, you talk about turnover. Turnover is a problem, but everyone's like, oh, well, this, we tried this before, it didn't work, or we've done it this way the same past 5 years, let's continue. But if we walk into some of these conversations and say, how might we start to think about, like, anything is on the table. And sometimes when you start throwing things at the wall, people start to feel more relaxed, right? And that's when you talk about that psychological safety. It wasn't a moment of saying, here it is, but it's happening innately because people are starting to connect and saying, well, I thought about this and, I heard about it here, or I want to try it. And it's because the environment's set up in a way where you say, let's just try anything. People want to just throw all kind of randomness into the conversation. And I think some of that has worked in some of the organizations or trainings that I've done, because they don't realize that they're truly saying, hey, this is that environment. They're creating it without having it being cold. That's like a psychologically safe environment. And I think that's a practice that's worked for us. And again, in my previous company. So I just think taking that even further and say, how might we create something different? Or how might we ask this question? Or how might we approach this problem? Puts people in a place of, I guess I can try anything, right? Because there's no responsibility in those kind of moments to say, hey, if it fails, it fails, because you're going to test it out. And I think that's the beauty of saying, hey, like, I can fail right here because I feel safe and everyone is with me doing it. So just something that's worked for us.
Thank you for that. And so my question was about like activities that you can use in workshops, and I'll just share one as well. One that I really love is that getting all the group in and trying to teach them to juggle, and trying to juggle 3 balls, and what normally happens is people have challenges. They can't do it, and they're afraid, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's impossible. And normally after half an hour, 40 minutes, letting the group be very uncomfortable about not being able to juggle, is that then switch and say, okay, what we want you to do now is every time the ball drops, you got to jump up and you got to celebrate that. You got to be so happy that it didn't work. And almost every time, and so you get into that routine about really celebrating mistakes and being comfortable with that. And then normally, within an hour after that, normally people start being able to juggle. So it's a really amazing, like, little microcosm example that sort of demonstrates the power that you can get by just enabling that vulnerability. But everybody's uncomfortable trying to juggle. I'd be uncomfortable trying to do it now, but yeah, that's just an example. The other thing, just before we move on, is just doubling down on what Beth spoke about the consistency, I guess, and having that that common, I guess, almost like a habit of common behaviour. I think one of the things that, again, back to my Air Force example, is that I think in the Air Force and lots of environments, in sporting environments I'm in as well, there's a real routine where you brief, like when I'm at a volleyball tournament, we go and play volleyball and then we debrief. And so that's built in. And so you really build in that people go in, they take their rank off. We're all the same. We just want to all be better. We want to win the next game, or we want to, fly better. So, but what helps, it takes time to build in, needs that routine of people seeing that consistency, that they're not judged when they do talk about, well, how about we do this, or how about we do that? Anyway, that's enough of me sharing just for the moment. So I guess moving on. So what sort of strategies can leaders employ to hold people accountable, but by also trying to build and maintain psychological safety? So we still need to hold people accountable, but we do want, again, that safe environment. So it's sort of a mixed thing there. So what's some ideas about that? Who would like to jump in?
I can jump in. Yeah, I find when leaders are like learning this concept themselves and they really want to put it into practice, they almost freeze a little bit around the accountability side. Like, oh, well, I can't hold someone accountable because they won't feel safe. It's like they're not actually, they're not. You can do them both, right? So it's actually when you can create high psychological safety and high accountability that people get into that learning zone. So I think part of it is, I find leaders in general, separate from this, a lot of leaders actually have a hard time holding people accountable, full stop. They don't really know how to do that appropriately. So I think something that inside organizations, whether it's the HR team, whether it's the leadership teams, to really work on what does it mean to hold people accountable? How do we get, it starts from the start, like how do we get clear about goals? How do we actually check in on goals? How do you provide people feedback? This is a lot of stuff, right? So it's not like, add water and stir and then also add in psychological safety. But it is really hard to hold people accountable if you don't have any of those practices in place. So I think what organizations can really do is put a focus on accountability, and that it's an expectation that leaders hold people accountable and then support them with the resources, the training in order to do that. And then talk to them about how that pairs with psychological safety, because I think the accountability piece is an issue in general.
Beth, that is so spot on. After years of working in HR, it's people struggle with it, and especially as you get to know someone and you build a relationship. To your point, it's, Rod shared with me and told me about his struggles. I can't hold them accountable, and it's like, well, wait, hold on, we have to make sure we're also productive too. So I think the other piece is not just understanding the parameters that the organization has set around accountability and performance management, but then also continuously assessing it, right? Like, are those things working? Because what you put in place 10 years ago, so much has changed, hybrid world, so much has gone on. Are those things remaining? And then it's also in those conversations with that person to say, hey, of course, I want you to share your failures. I want you to feel comfortable in making mistakes and know that there's a team to support you and we'll work through it. But there's also a level of, when you continuously make those same mistakes, there will be some conversation about what's next. There's a difference of, hey, I didn't understand and it took me a while to share with you and now I know I can, versus, hey, I just keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. And because you told me once it was okay to make the mistake, I could make it 20 more times. I think there's a difference of understanding, is someone taking advantage of the situation versus, hey, I support you, but I'm also going to make sure that we're getting to the end goal, because at the end of the day, we both work for this organization and have, goals and metrics and KPIs to hit. So I think that is extremely important what Beth said, and making sure everyone has level setting clarity on that, right? That's the big part of goal setting, is that we built those goals together. So as a leader, if we're building them together, then I know your areas of opportunity. I know your wins. So I'm helping you when we come up with the goals for the year, the quarter, or however you set them. We're doing that with that in mind. And if we're not, that's also setting us up to fail as well. And that's why there's the lack of accountability.
No, that's really good answers, both of them. Yeah.
The hot seat of going last.
Yeah.
What I can add to this is, obviously, like Noel said, two-way dialogue around the expectations, but also setting the group norms and values in terms of what is expected from everyone and what is something that we hold each other accountable for, right? In the sense that if somebody is sharing a concern, or let's say they're behind on a particular project deadline, do we jump in to give solutions? Do we say, oh, I'm sure you're going to fix it. You're great, right? You'll just do it. Rather than blocking that conversation, can we allow them to think through and say, okay, how can I help you with that? How can the team support you in this? So acknowledging that we are all different. We are going through various situations in our life, financial, medical, personal emergencies. At the same time, the company is going through its own changes and, all of the trends, all of the concerns that the company is facing. Can we all agree on what are my expectations in my role? What are the expectations of the team? And then how can I ask for support or share my feedback so that we're all able to achieve our goals? And going back to the value piece, what engages all the employees? What are their personal values? Somebody could be extremely competitive and they may feel held back by the team, which possibly, has other priorities in place. And can we have a discussion around what is the best way for me using my strengths, using my values, using my aspirations to succeed and grow in my career, but at the same time support the team that I'm with? Psychological safety is the number one component of high-performing teams. And all of us look at it differently, but we all need it. So how can we enable that in this group? What's a fair conversation to have? What will we do when things are not going well, right? How will we get back using mindfulness to a space where we all feel safe in sharing things and achieving our goals? I think that's what accountability means to me.
Well, and I think something that you bring up there is that the accountability needs to happen across the team. Like peer-to-peer needs to hold each other accountable. People need to hold their leader accountable. And I love what you said around norms and values, because it grounds in like, this is who we are. This is what we do as a team, because this is who we are. And I think for a leader, then when when a leader doesn't want to hold someone accountable because, oh, maybe they won't feel psychologically safe, the rest of the team is going to take a hit on that, right? Like they're going to see that leader is not holding someone accountable for not doing their, not meeting the expectations. So I think having that 360-degree view of everyone has accountability for it. And when we do it, we all see it. And when we don't do it, we all see it.
And sorry, I'm going to hop back on because, managers, especially first-time managers, they want to be friends with their team. They want to have that same wonderful relationship that they had before they got promoted. And that's where they feel anxiety and stress because, hey, you can't really be a friend to everybody because then there are these boundaries which end up breached. I need to hold you accountable. I'm managing you. Yes, we can talk about, we can have fun. We can go out partying later. But at work, we need to be fair to the rest of the team as well. So that's where accountability becomes important. Because once that whole favoritism and bias and, different expectations from different people, all of that just becomes too much of an HR issue that we want to curb in the bud and move forward productively.
And so just picking up on the word accountable, I'm just curious. I don't think the word accountable has to always be a negative word. I think as you've said, there's shared standards, shared goals. Sometimes being holding helping someone be accountable is actually can be helping them learn and grow as well. So, you know, if you just let it slide, how they ideally, again, they feel safe that they're going to get feedback, and that's going to be taken in a way that's going to help them be better next time. It is a great environment to be in.
Right. Yeah, I just love what you just said, right? Like accountability is not a bad word. And I think it gets a bad rap, right? Because when someone brings you in a room, I'm holding you accountable. So of course it elicits this fear. But I always tell people, like, have an I call it accountability partner. And I actually, in the workplace, I have two. I have a peer of mine, right? Because of course I know my leader will hold me accountable, but I have a peer of mine, you know, who can in meetings ensure that, hey, if I said the wrong thing, can check me, right? That's how I kind of leverage. Like, hey, like I feel comfortable with this person. I have a psychologically safe relationship with them, and they can talk to me and let me know, hey, Noelle, you didn't show up right this way, or you missed the mark, or like, you know, hey, maybe you pushed too much, whatever the situation is. And the other one is someone on my team. And it's for that reason of the psychological, creating psychological safety, because that person I feel comfortable with. And of course, I have to make sure, right, from a favoritism line, that it's not there. But I created because I want my team to also know how I show up as well, right? Like, and I want them to feel comfortable to give me that feedback. So it's not just that peer to peer, that they can talk to me about X, Y, and Z. So I think accountability is a great thing. It gets that bad rap, but if you frame it as I have accountability partners, then it's less of, oh, this scary concept. And I always tell people, like, have an accountability partner, and it's maybe have someone that you really like, maybe have someone that you're building a relationship with, because that also helps you to be able to show up in a way that they're going to give you some feedback that maybe may be tough, but it's what you need to know, and it helps to strengthen that relationship that you may not have.
I like that, Noelle. It's not just about the what in terms of our deliverables, but also the how, about how are we behaving, how are we showing up. It may not even be verbal. It could just be body language. You know, if you're not having eye contact, or if you're not being respectful, attentive when someone's talking, and holding someone accountable that, hey, you're not participating as you should. I also want to bring in the piece of diversity, right? People are different. So rather than looking at something as this person's being disrespectful, is it just a difference in personality, right? If somebody's not immediately responding to what you said, maybe they need time to deliberate and, you know, process it before they get back to you with a coherent response. So is it different, or is it really disrespectful? And then can I share that feedback respectfully to say, hey, I saw that you were not really, you know, focusing on what I was saying in the meeting, and it made me feel bad because I want to connect with you. I want to work with you. And feeling safe to say that without being judged or ridiculed, or, you know, you going behind my back and saying that to somebody else. I think these are the tiny behaviors that we all should hold each other accountable for, to build that really strong team.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Like, I can't believe we've like 20 minutes left, so it's been a great conversation already, but it's we could talk for a few hours, I think. So if an organization generally lacks psychological safety, and there's you know, many that do, if you're a leader who really values that, what can you do? What are some steps that you could do to help cultivate that within your own team, just focusing on your team? Some ideas.
I'll kick us off. As I mentioned before, it starts with you, right? So not every organization is going to be perfect. But I always think back at, how do I want to show up? Like, what's the legacy that I want to set as the leader? And that starts with me being open and honest with my team and creating it. I've worked at organizations where maybe my immediate team felt psychologically safe, but the broader team, was something very different. And it's how we all showed up and supported one another. And whether I was a leader or a member in the team, I think that's important. And making sure that the space that I hold and that I own, right, as the leader, is where an environment where people can be themselves, right? Like going back to the concept of authenticity. When I can show up as me, I can show up as me however that looks, right? And I think that's really important too, as we talk about diversity. When you say show up as your authentic self, you need to be prepared for people to show up as their authentic self. And as a leader, it's important to create that space where you, if you're going to say it, make sure you allow it. So if that means someone showing up with green hair, you better be okay with it, right? As an example. And but I think is if there's issues on the bigger team, right, or the whether it's the team or the company in your circle, right, on your team, make sure that people can speak up. That maybe some of it's around meetings, right? We talked about some people need a debrief, or maybe someone wants a pre-read before. Find out what the team needs by having those conversations, and that's going to take a lot of work. Some people think this work is soft skills and it's all about feelings. That's crap. It's hard work, right? It requires deep conversations. It requires relationship building. So understand who you're working with so you can help create what the environment that they need, because it's going to look different. I'm looking at four of us right here. If we were a team, we're all going to need different things. So as an owner of that team, I would need to make sure I understand each person and what they bring. So that's what I would say. And then the other piece I'd just add is, hopefully by you modeling those behaviors and asking the right questions and building that with your team, that either your team starts to kind of permeate that throughout the organization and model that with other people, right? I'm not saying they're walking around with a sandwich board, right, yelling, hey, my team is psychological safety. But maybe at the water cooler, they're having that conversation, or maybe on the next Zoom call, they're talking about the environment that you as the leader have set, and other people hear about that and say, oh, what's your leader doing, right? Like, and they want to be a part of that. So whether it's your team does it or you as the leader of that team, when you're having conversations with your peers, how are you, back to that accountability, how are you holding your peers accountable for showing up? And that's how hopefully it starts to permeate throughout, whether it's the larger, like let's say it's larger HR team, and then the rest of the organization. I tell people you have to work in your lane. So if I'm a, line level manager saying I'm going to change, and create psychological safety in your company, may be a hard feat. And I say it's not possible. It's going to be a hard feat. But if you start to work in the space that you control and you own, and start to show those behaviors and have those conversations, you don't know what that can do. So I just say, for anyone who's on the call and who's listening in, who's saying, hey, I have it on my team and I don't see it in other places, think about what you can do to maybe help small little exercises or small little bits and pieces to help others. So
yeah, I think it's also really important, even if you're able to create it on your team, to really be aware of what is happening in the broader organization. I worked at one company in my career where I watched people, I have never seen so many people get fired so quickly, like one mistake and you were gone, and that was it, right? And so no matter how much safety, and I'll be honest, my leader did nothing to create psychological safety, so I left that organization. But even if my leader had been able to create it on my team, it was definitely, there's always a lot of cross-functional work. It was definitely not safe to make a mistake outside of my team. And so I think if you're a leader in an organization, it's one thing to be a leader in an organization where, the rest of the organization kind of doesn't think about it or doesn't really focus on it. And it's another thing to be in an organization where you've got an environment that people are really going to get punished for mistakes. It's a, for lack of a better word, it's a dangerous environment. Understanding that you can create that pocket of safety on your team, but you also have to be able to prepare your teammates for what they're going to face outside of the team and how do they actually handle that. And that's a big emotional burden, honestly, for that leader to take on. So I think I just bring it up because, not to be a Debbie Downer, but I mean, we talk about toxic workplaces and people are working in them every single day. And so I agree, like, do what you can for your team, but also know that requires some broader views, some preparation from the outside, and also be really well aware of, as you're trying to influence that outside of your team, if you constantly hit the brick wall and that is not changing, there's only so much you're going to be able to do to help your team. And so to be just really, really honest with yourself and others about that, and make your choices based on that as well.
Beth, I've been there myself, being the agony aunt where everybody felt safe to come and speak to me. But hey, I was in this team and in this organization that did not value psychological safety so much. So, wow, you just brought back some memories, not very pleasant ones. But as a leader for psychological safety, right, how can you make that happen? I think sharing any kind of bad news is difficult for all of us. Nobody really wants to say the bad stuff, right? And therefore, can we encourage and appreciate courageous conversations to say, hey, this conflict is good. This disagreement that we're having right now, this misalignment is a sign of something productive, something better that we can create. And I appreciate you bringing this up right now, knowing fully well that it is hard to be on that hot seat of bringing bad news. In fact, can we actually have a devil's advocate in every meeting or decision group that we have, where somebody is actively blocking all ideas or just bringing out all the negative points of the things we're talking about? Doing a pre-mortem, for that matter, of what could go wrong if we went ahead with a particular plan. This allows people to really come out of the shell, talk about their concerns, share any resources or ideas they have. And I want to bring up one of the points in the comments that I read about promotions. We all talk about, encouraging disagreement and, conflict is good, debate is good. But then who finally gets promoted? People who are seen as agreeable, positive, people who are seen as nice people who accept what others say. And I think we need to flip the switch on that one, right? Welcome disagreement by saying, okay, here's a leader who really pushes back on things and pushes back on the right things for the good of the team and organization. And these are the kind of leaders we want to grow and develop in our organization. So again, not just managing it within our teams, but making sure that the organization respects this and encourages open disagreement and psychological safety as well.
Now we're down to 10 minutes left. I might just jump on to the next question. And just thinking that we've got probably likely a very HR professional audience and people in those HR management roles. I'm just wondering, in an organization, that lacks this psychological safety, or leaders lack the psychological safety, what are some of the things that a HR professional can bring to the table to try to help improve that culture in an organization? So what sort of actions do you think HR can contribute to this?
I think sometimes figure out what will actually speak to the leader to convince them or to be influential, right? So do you look at employee turnover and what are some of those exit interviews saying? Like, are we hearing things there that we can make a connection? And then make the connection to how expensive is it to bring someone into an organization to do the recruiting, to do the hiring, and how expensive is it to have them leave, right? I think sometimes being able to, when people hear psychological safety, it's like, oh, it's this thing, it's this floaty, squishy thing in the air, and it's a nice to do. When really there's a very strong business case for, by creating a psychologically safe environment, you get people who are much more productive in their jobs, who stay with the organization longer. So you get a pipeline of talent that continues to grow in the organization. You get more innovation, right? You reduce turnover, all of those things that are very much like business metrics. And if you can help to make those connections where leaders don't just see it as like, oh yeah, psychological safety, we'll get to that thing when we're doing like a soft skills training in an employee, team built, like it's changing the perception of it and really speaking language that the leaders understand and are able to connect it to the success of the business, I think can be really helpful.
Now, and in building on what you just said, I'm just wondering, can anyone share any examples from your own experience of where enhancing psych safety led to improvements? So in team performance and well-being of either teams or organizational level, like where have you seen the good outcomes about this? Can't be all bad. So,
Go ahead, Beth.
No,
Oh, I was just gonna say yes. I have, and I'm fortunate. My current company, one of course, I lead up the DEI and the L&D function. And you're right, it's not all bad, and when it's done right. Not only do you have less turnover, right? And we're in a space similar to retail. And I came from a retail background in terms of employees and turnover, but our turnover is down, right? Employee engagement is up. A sense of belonging, has increased, and our employee resource groups are thriving because that environment is set. Right. And our CEO, I think, is a prime example of someone who models it. Her name is Sarah Robb O'Hagan, and she wrote a book called Extreme You, and it talks about her failures. And she literally leads in conversations about that. So we think about someone who models behavior, it shows that this is the norm, right? As I just said before, this is the norm, this is the expectation, and this is how I hope and I want everyone to show up. So when it's done, and to Beth's point, it is tied to metrics. It's having those conversations with leaders where there may be some areas of opportunity to say, look what happens when it's not done right, right? Look what happens when there is danger and, you have turnover in this area, or you have employees who are not happy, or speak up, right, is our anonymous hotline when there's complaints and there's conversations. And then that's when we make sure that we have those, we get a little deeper and figure out what's going on. And we use a bunch of different things to do that through trainings and our pulse survey, but we make sure we have those conversations, and it's not, to Beth's point, that one and done. Oh, when we get there, like when we're ready for the soft feelings, we'll get into that conversation. But I think it's just really important because, you think about the ownership, as we said from the beginning, everyone is an owner and everyone's accountable to it. So I think we lost Rod. Oh, Rod's back.
yeah, I'm back. I think I'm in a hotel. Sorry about that. So it's hotel internet.
No worries. No worries. So the other piece I was just going to add, when Beth was talking about tying it to metrics, I think that's really important in helping leaders to understand, right? Especially think about a sales team. They want to understand what's the return on investment of my time when I do these things. And I think the more that you can explain that in terms of turnover, engagement scores, belonging, it helps to create the message and gives everyone ownership, and it gives their buy-in. The other piece I'll just add as an HR professional, if you have leaders who are not sure how to create the environment or don't believe that they should, when you're working with them, you have to help them find their why. I think that's important. It can't just be, we're talking about psychological safety because it's the hot topic of the moment, right? Especially, of course, coming out of COVID or still being in COVID. I don't know where we are now. But they have to have the why of why it's important to them for their people. And when you connect it to them and say, man, I know I have to do this right so I can show up better for Rod as the leader, as someone on my team, or like when you can connect it that way, then you have more responsibility and more accountability, and hopefully they show up. So
I'm just going to say it. HR is not the custodian of psychological safety on your team. Don't send us to do the dirty work. I think HR needs to be a coach, ask the right questions of the managers, meet the teams, right? We can't be in every meeting, but help managers in creating that environment for their teams. Ask questions around, hey, what are some of the challenging conversations you had in your team meetings? It could be a one-on-one, it could be a team meeting. What ideas came up? How did you manage dissent in that team? And again, harmony is not the sign of a great team, right? If the manager says, oh, everybody gets along great with each other, that does not mean it's an excellent team. They really need to uncover what's happening. And again, diversity is a big one here. People feel differently about different things. They may have different situations. And everybody being able to share their concerns, their ideas, and constructively debating with each other, not to see which is the best person on the team, but what is the best idea on the team. By creating that sense of belonging, I think a lot of problems get solved, whether it's attrition, whether it's low performance, whether it's low engagement. And I think the best use of psychological safety is when managers feel confident about their teams and nobody's really a manager in title because the team is practically running itself. And I think that's what HR needs to help managers and leaders develop rather than being there and trying to firefight all the time.
No, really great points once again. Now, we have a big 3 minutes remaining. It's just crazy how fast this has gone. So as we wrap up, I just wonder if everybody, each panelist, can just provide one practical tip or piece of advice for leaders who are really just beginning to focus on psych safety within their teams. So what would be the one key thing that you would say look at doing?
I'll start us off, and I like to tell people to know thyself. Know who you are. Understand whether you need to go take an emotional intelligence assessment, get feedback from others, but you can't be the best leader for others and create that environment if you don't know who you are. So I would say leaders, start with you so you can do that for others. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would say be overt about it, talk about it, use the language around psychological safety, talk about what it means to have each other's backs, tie that to accountability, and make it an ongoing discussion so it just becomes part of how you operate as a team.
I would say, remember how you felt as a team member when you were engaging with different leaders and managers, and remember not to do those nasty things to people that you work with. And then watch this video because I'm sure it's going to be recorded and shared.
All right, well, that brings us to the end, and it has gone so fast, but I just really want to thank the panelists. The role, I think what we've heard is the role of psych safety is really critical in fostering effective teams, and there's a lot of, it all depends on how you apply it, but it's extremely critical. So thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing and speaking with you in future panels. So thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.